Do what thou will be the whole piece of law.
David Koresh, also known as Vernon Howell, is a very controversial figure. A lot of people see him as someone who stood up to the government when no one else would. He's remembered with the likes of Ruby Ridge and other events connected to the government's abuse of power. But this isn't all I feel he should be known for. He should be known for a lot of other things, mainly how, just as psychopaths and sociopaths have a lot of warning signs, people who manipulate and partake in other practices that I can be a little more explicit about as the video goes on, have patterns, have signs, and it's something that you should look out for, because this story involves a lot of religion, mainly Christianity. What I want to focus on is not so much Waco and the stand that took place there and what might have happened and what the consequences should be. Although if you want me to make that a video, I totally will, because it's a very engaging story, and I feel the consequences aren't as well explored, mainly because a lot of people are not very interested in the consequences as much as what it represents. But if you want me to do a video on that, please leave it in the comments. Please like, comment, and subscribe. My videos I make out of love, but the encouragement of others is always helpful. And when YouTube sees my numbers going up, it loves to encourage my numbers to go up more. So please help me. It helps my ego, it helps everything else, my channel. I'm not asking you for money, just press the buttons, okay? You know what to do. So, where do we start? Vernon Howell was born to Bobby Wayne Howell and Bonnie Sue Clark in the fine old year of 1959. This is prime time if you're an American, because he's just after the baby boomers, and he's raised in the cultural zeitgeist of the late 50s into the early 60s, but mainly absorbing 60s culture. And if you look at him, like at his arrest photos or any of the other photos, he really embodies the time. The warning signs start early. I mentioned these warning signs in the beginning, but he grew up in sort of a unique situation. His mother, Bonnie, first of all was 14 and his dad was 20. This is first of all an egregious relationship gap, and not the last time we're going to see this in Vernon's story. So Bonnie not really having the parental skills or stability, mainly because they were unmarried, so Bobby had no reason to stick around, so he just didn't. She felt like she couldn't adequately take care of Vernon. So she went to her mom and said, "Hey, can you take care of my kid while I get my life together?" And her mom raised Vernon as her son until she got her life together about 5 years later, when she got into a committed relationship, had a job, was a little more on top of things. You know, she's 21 now, ready to step up to the plate. And during this time, Vernon has been experiencing his actual mother as more of an aunt, or like a distant family member that shows up every so often. You know, hi, you have that weird family member that shows up every so often and just says hi, or like brings you stuff, or like is a little too connected to you, and you're like, oh yeah, sure, that's fine. But when she comes to pick up Vernon from her mother's place, she tells Vernon this all at once, and he describes this as an experience that he'll never forget. It's something that sticks with him and is a motivating factor throughout his entire life. It's this whole deception, you know, the snake in the garden. I'm kidding. I'm gonna talk about that later. I'm getting too ahead of myself. But Bonnie's new relationship that she's in is not the best for him either. Mainly because he's going to generate a lot of tensions with his stepdad. Maybe for the reason that he experienced SA at some point in his life. During this time when he was like 5 to 9, he was experiencing SA. Which is not a good thing, but also a good indicator of what was to come. Mainly because this is going to become a pattern, not for him per se, but just listen. It's easier to explain as I give more context. When he was old enough to go to school, he was very lonely. He was the kid that was always left out, and he didn't really have any friends. He was diagnosed with dyslexia later in life, and it's suspected that his poor vision contributed to him being placed into special ed classes and trying to fit in there more than anywhere else. However, he did discover that, like most guys, when they have a struggle in life, they pick one of 4 directions, and he chose fitness. Well, for now at least, he's going to choose one of the other 2 directions a little later. But he chooses fitness. He gets really into sports, and he gets into sculpting himself. He effectively turns himself into a canvas. And as he's beginning to exit school, he's going to drop out of high school and get into a lot of illegal relationships, is how I've seen it described. If you want to be really, really aggressive about it, it's SA. If you want to get really lax about it, it could loosely be covered under Romeo and Juliet laws if you're super liberal about it. But I don't want to judge that. I just want to say that he had relationships with underage women, one of whom we don't know the name and the other being named Sandy Berlin. And there are actually a few weird stories because these are both like people who have connections to the church. One of these people is Sandy Berlin's father, and he goes to him and he's like, I am chosen by God to marry your daughter, please let me do it. Keep in mind he's like 21, she's 16, and he rightfully says no, and he prays for guidance, and he sees a Bible open to Isaiah 34:19, which he grossly misinterprets, by the way. Isaiah 34 is mainly about the destruction of Edom. It's not about what he thinks he's going to claim to make it about, because Isaiah 34:19 is about, all the animals will come and rest in the city after it's been pillaged, and none of them will want for mates, and they'll all repopulate the land and reforest it and turn it into this wonderful place to live. And Vernon looks at it and says, oh, no one will want to mate. That means I should have your daughter. Since he has such a close connection with religion, I want to take a little detour to talk about what religion he joins. He joins the 5th largest Christian denomination in the world, which is Seventh-day Adventism. So this could be a whole video on its own, but I want to keep it short. I want to keep it snappy. Originally, they were an Aryan church. Not in the sense of that they were all, white supremacists or something, but there was something early on in Christianity that was a giant debate at the time that people really don't glance at now as, this is just kind of a given to a lot of Christians out there. The debate, or what the Christians would call the Arian heresy, was where a guy named Arian said, is God and Jesus the same person, or is Jesus the creation of God? Now, this was a big debate, and in short, the non-Arians won. This would be a religious issue that was settled in the First Council of Nicaea, and originally, Seventh-day Adventism was an Arian religion, meaning that they believe Jesus is a creation of God the Father. However, they have some weird things amongst their leaders where the original leader's wife has a dream and she's like, oh, I'm actually a Trinitarian and we should adopt Trinitarian ideals, aka God is the Son, the Holy Spirit, and the Father all at once. And there's a time where it's a half and half split, and then they finally issue a doctrine that says, yes, we're all Trinitarian now. So by the time Vernon Howell joins the Seventh-day Adventist Church, they're a Trinitarian church. And some of their other distinguishing features, besides just being evangelical Christians, think evangelical Christian at the base, and then they believe that the Sabbath day is on Saturday because God took place in a 6-day creation and then rested on the 7th day. So Seventh-day Adventists celebrate or worship on Saturday rather than Sunday being the traditional holy day. They also believe in, I don't know the official term for it, but it's Christians since a certain year, I believe it's 1848, are being investigated by God to see if they're Christian enough, quote unquote, or if they're genuine about their beliefs. And this is an ongoing process, and it's going to become a lot more important when we start talking about how Seventh-day Adventism splits. But they also believe that when the book of Revelations is fulfilled, that will bring about the second coming of Christ and the apocalypse. And they also believe that it's not going to be, Jehovah's Witnesses saying oh, we'll all ascend to heaven and we'll have a great time. No, Seventh-day Adventists will just say, oh, all the sinners will be completely destroyed along with Satan and all the fallen angels, and their consciousness will seek to exist and will inherit the earth, and it's a lot more apocalyptic fire and brimstone type deal. So, you might be wondering, why haven't I mentioned the Branch Davidians yet? Well, I'm going to mention the Branch Davidians now, because they're originally a split from the Seventh-day Adventists. So, imagine man named Victor Houteff, in the summer of 1930, publishes a book called The Shepherd's Rod. This is mainly what we're going to call Luther's 95 Theses for the Seventh-day Adventists. He mainly comes into it with the idea of, oh, we should reform the church. These are just some issues that I have. We should totally do some research into the 144,000 saved. He distributes 3 of these books to Seventh-day Adventist leadership, and at best they ignore him. In the middle, I think one of them sends him a letter saying, you should stop this, you're causing division, you're gonna get kickbacks for this, and then they just, later in the year, excommunicate him, just completely get rid of him. So, not being one to take anything lying down, begins to proselytize, and 2 years later, in 1932, writes a second book, which is a modification to his first book, and he says, now that I have all these people who believe in me, and that might want to follow me, can you please get something together so that we can, examine this as a faith and see whether this is a legitimate view to hold or not, and see if we can just admit this into the orthodoxy. The Seventh-day Adventist Church then gets a wide variety of people together. They're all elders, and it gets a little sticky here, because as you're going to see at different points in this video, if you haven't already, there's going to be 2 very different themes of what's going on depending on what side you're viewing this from, and no non-biased sources cover this in any meaningful detail, so we have to go off of the 2 biased sources that we have. So, on Houteff's side, aka the Shepherd's Rod side, they will get this book, he will present the first study that he has, which is called The Harvest, and he will effectively be barred or gerrymandered or finagled or whatever cutesy term you want to use to effectively give up or not present any further, and 4 months later they'll just view it as heresy and they'll kick him out officially. If you go from the Seventh-day Adventist side, their documents say more along the lines of, oh, we let him present the harvest and we wanted to give him all this time, but he was rushing us. It was mainly, we wanted him to continue giving these talks because he had 4 more that we wanted him to get through, and we said, we can take years if you want to, just get all your ideas out there so we can deliberate this fully. And he says, no, and flips them off, just make a decision right now. And there's all this effort to get him transcripts and stuff, and he just refuses and goes his own way. So whichever one you want to believe, the end result is that Victor Houteff will split and form the Shepherd's Rod. He then proselytizes more on what he'll call hunting expeditions, which is basically just his door-to-door, hey, do you want to join my organization? Here's my pamphlet. But he's mainly targeting Seventh-day Adventists. He's trying to take from the congregation that he already knows, and it's just hey, you got to accept the 144,000 rather than, an unlimited group. You have to accept all these other specific ideas. And he's really successful with this. They're successful enough that they're able to buy an entire gigantic compound with 900 acres east of Waco, Texas, and they get peak membership numbers of around 100,000 people. It's ridiculously big. It's above its time, it's strong, they're looking like they're going to be the main leading sect of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and then he dies. Completely unexpectedly. He's still going door to door, he's fine, and then just snap, he's dead. So what do you do now? Of course, just like in any organization where power is vested in the hands of one person and then they suddenly die with no backup plan, people immediately start fighting over who should be vice president because he's eternally reigning president, so now they're fighting over who should be the vice president. And there's 2 contenders. One is the current vice president, E.T. Wilson. The second is his wife, Florence Houteff, and they get into a power struggle. There's really only them. And Florence manages to finagle the council in such a way, claiming the gift of prophecy, to kick out E.T. Wilson and become the current VP. She then establishes her power for about half a year until someone named Benjamin Roden shows up. It's kind of the, oh hey, I have the power of prophecy, and you guys should listen to me, but everyone just says, no, you're a complete outsider to our organization, you should go. And he then leaves after having a power struggle of, like, effectively, like, a month. He tries to establish himself and then loses. What does Florence do as her first act in power? Well, she, first of all, wants to centralize more power within the office of the vice president. Wow, what a surprise. And then she makes a doomsday prediction. She predicts that the 42-month period in Revelations would begin in November of 1955. By the way, this is while Victor's body is still, I don't want to say warm, but mild, because he dies in February, and she issues this prophecy in November of 1955. So this 42-month period would end on April 22nd, 1959. So she makes this prophecy, and of course, like all doomsday prophecies, you get the massive rally around, let's pool all our resources, we'll get together, we'll do this on our own. And then what happens? 1959 comes and nothing happens. Wow, what a big surprise. She then makes the ultimate move of saying, let's sell everything and leave. This giant administrative center was built for a group of people that is not as large as it originally was. Let's just sell, like, the extraneous 700 acres to some ranch. Let's sell the administrative center to someone else, and let's give all the money to the executive council, which I am a member of, and we'll leave. So she leaves with effectively like $5,000 in 1960s money and is never seen again, effectively in a position of any consequence. So who actually buys the land and the administrative center? Well, the land goes to some surrounding ranch, no one cares. It's farmland. Oh boy, I get 700 acres in Texas. That's effectively my backyard. I already have 1,000 more acres because everything is bigger in Texas. But Benjamin Roden, remember the guy from a little bit earlier who tried to claim, I have a prophecy, you guys should totally listen to me, and then gets kicked out? That guy comes back and buys the administrative center and like 100 surrounding acres. He then establishes his own continuation of the shepherd's rod that is a little different, but it's not a consequential difference. He holds power, quote unquote, for about, nigh on 20 years, 18, we'll just round it up to 20 for sake of him being cool, and he leaves his wife Lois in charge and says, well, he doesn't say anything, he's dead, but he leaves Lois in charge of the compound. Now, I hope you haven't forgotten about Vernon Howell, because this is where he rejoins the story. He goes to Mount Carmel to study spiritualism and other non-committal Bible stuff underneath Lois Roden. So why is this important? Well, to continue the Vernon Howell being a genuinely questionable person when it comes to intimate relationships, he will begin having an affair with Lois, even though her husband's dead, so I mean, who really cares, but she's dating someone else. It's messy. And he says some, like, really super insane things that if any women watch my show, if someone walked up to you who you were, like, having intimate relations with and got up close to you and said, I have to have a child with you. We're going to create the chosen one. You have to bear my child. Isn't that insane? Isn't that just crazy? I would run. I'm a guy and I would run. But he is kind of making rifts here, because now it's not just the Roden. Oh yeah, sorry. Lois's son, George Roden, who is only going to be important for like 5 seconds, lives here as well. So they form like this little trinity of their own little group that's like 300 people at most. And they have a balance of power going on. George and Vernon hate each other. Like, absolutely despise each other. They get into their own little power struggle, but they're kept in check by Lois. George and Howell keep themselves in check. Howell keeps Lois in check, and George keeps Lois in check. Let me go into the names first, because they have some amazing names. I'm probably just going to refer to them by their leaders, but I can't just gloss over their names. So, Lois's group is called the Branch Davidian Seventh-day Adventist Association, and Howell's splinter group is called the Davidian Branch Davidian Seventh-day Adventist Association, or the abbreviations are up on screen, but they're too obnoxious to pronounce. So, during this time, when Howell is underneath Lois and learning, he begins claiming the gift of prophecy, and this is a huge thing, basically saying he's fit to lead, and this is what is partially causing the division. He starts preaching his own message, which he calls the serpent's root, and George Roden, obviously bearing the Roden name, thinks he's going to be the next leader, which is what causes such hatred between him and Howell. And he wants to marry this woman, but that's not really a problem, except for the fact that while he's pursuing this woman, her name is Rachel Jones, there's a fire that destroys a large amount of property. It's like a administration building worth $500,000. And Roden says that Howell's responsible and expels him. And they set up a camp in Palestine, Texas. Not Palestine, Texas. And during this time, Howell is an outlaw. He's got like 25 other followers with him, 25-ish, because they'll come and go. And during this time, he'll recruit around so many different areas, aka like California, UK, Australia, and Israel, wow, the Holy Land. And while he's in the Holy Land, he's going to see a vision of Cyrus the Great. Now, Cyrus the Great is super important if you know anything about his name later in life that we're going to mention, and that you probably know him by, and that's probably in the title of the video. But Cyrus has a bunch of different names. Mainly what's going to be important is that in the Bible, he's referred to as King David, and historically, if you translate his name from Iranian, it is like Kurash or Koresh or Korosh or Koresh, bunch of different pronunciations. But when he has this vision, he's like, I know what I have to do. So that's not going to happen until after all of this is resolved. But anyway, he's having this really terrible existence. He has his little commune of followers, and he's just basically the involuntary Ted Kaczynski. So, in 1987, Lois dies, and now this little triumvirate has collapsed. And after Lois dies, this reason to return would come in the form of a challenge. Because despite being exiled, effectively, he had a lot of sway over the Branch Davidians. He was effectively a leader in exile. Roden was on his last legs leadership-wise, and Roden wanted to issue a challenge. This challenge would be to raise the dead. So, Roden would cross a lot of lines and say, here's this dead body that I have dug up of a 20-year dead Branch Davidian. Raise them from the dead, Mr. Howell. And Howell, of course, does the rational thing and runs to a lawyer and says, I got him, I can sue him. That's illegal, you can't exhume dead bodies. And he slaps it on the table. I like to imagine he's like yelling at his lawyer. He's like, you have to sue him, you have to sue him. And the lawyer says, you need proof. You need proof. And he says, I need to go get proof. So, of course, the rational reaction to this, once again, this is going to be one of those scenarios where each side has two sides that they want you to believe, depending on who you are. So, I'm going to go through both as if they're equally valid. I'm not picking a side here historically. So, let's start with Howell's side first. Howell says, darn, I need proof. What am I going to do? So he goes, armed, of course. He and his followers will bring a couple shotguns, pistols, some arms to Mount Carmel and demand restoration of the body. They say, well, we need to take it off you. They don't go as far as to say, oh, you're under arrest. We want photographs of the body. We just want to prove that, you've done this illegal crime. We need evidence, this is a court proceeding. You need to follow along in the name of the court. And one thing leads to another. And, well, not one thing leads to another. Howell is trying to do this secretly, I forgot to mention. And he's bringing all this equipment. However, Roden discovers him. And this, of course, is the worst possible scenario, because you're, of course, going to throw up your hands and say, oh, we just wanted photographic proof that you had exhumed this dead guy, and not just immediately open fire, which is what they do. So they get into a gunfight, and now it is everyone's problem, because now the police are involved. And Howell and his followers are charged for attempted murder, of course. But I don't want to go into the trial right now because we have to cover Roden's version of events. Roden's version of events is that Howell and his followers wanted a direct violent takeover of Mount Carmel. And this was just the first step. Howell was going to come in the middle of the night, assassinate him, take over the rest of the leadership, seize the compound, and become leader of the religious organization by force. Now, he of course discovers this nefarious plot, gets into a gunfight, blah, 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 stuff happens, they go to trial. And the result of this trial is equally funny and kind of inconsequential, because they kind of take Howell's side and say, yeah, you're kind of going to discover evidence of a crime, it's okay. And he gets off really lightly, and then he takes all the prosecutors out to ice cream. AKA, they get acquitted, and then he takes his prosecutors out to ice cream. That's so silly. However, if we want to wrap up Rodin's story, he kills another Seventh-day Adventist and is ruled insane, and he effectively stays in prison the rest of his life. But it doesn't end there. You think a mental institution would stop Rodin? He continues filing legal claims against Howell for the rest of his life. And you may be asking, well, yeah, Howell may have taken this by force or by evicting the most previous tenant, but how does this get around to Howell actually owning the land? Well, since Rodin didn't pay his taxes, Howell and his followers were able to raise the money and just buy the place outright for basically a steal on what it was. It was like a couple $1,000. I think it was like $5,000 in unpaid taxes. And obviously these legal papers that Rodin is filing are going to be a problem, mainly because this is only 4 or 5 years until the Gotterdammerung happens. And at this point, after he takes control of the compound and settles himself in, gets all that power sorted away, he will finally take on the moniker that everyone in this video will know him for, because I put it in the title. You're probably expecting me to refer to him by this the entire time, but he will change his name to David Koresh. And this name has an extremely significant religious meaning. He's attempting to take on the mantle of Cyrus the Great. He's referred to as King David in the Bible, first name David, and then he takes the literal Iranian interpretation of Koresh or Korosh or Kuresh, or however you want to say it. I'm not Iranian, and ancient Persian has a lot of interpretations, but that's effectively where the name comes from. He's taking on the mantle of King David, and he had a prophecy that he is like from the bloodline of King David, even though there's no evidence to back it up. And I don't want to end this off on a nice note, mainly because I want to prelude what the ATF was serving when they were going to the compound. They were serving a lot of mishandling of essay against children and adults. It's not a good thing. And his childhood, I think, my personal opinion, I don't think he was essaying kids. I think this was more of a, as one writer I saw described it, I think it was in a book by Sarah Reimer. I'll put it up on the screen. I remember I read like a little bit of it for this part, because it's mainly about who Koresh was as a person. It was about, you know, someone growing up underneath him. And from her view, it was more of he was teaching the way he grew up as the way that you should do it. Like, you know, no one should be without a mate. But like, you know, when they're, oh, this just feels gross to talk about. I don't think he was essaying kids. I think it was more of he was just giving them distorted views of the most intimate acts that a human can take part in. That's what I think. And the ATF would serve for essaying kids. And that's what got into the whole Waco siege. I'm not going to cover it in this video, but I wanted to give you a little more context onto who David Koresh was, mainly because he has a lot of strong driving forces that I feel if it had gone any other way, he still would have ended up in a Ruby Ridge-esque scenario, just because of what he set out to do, and the force behind him, the inertia, was too strong to be stopped, at least peacefully. And that's where I want to leave it. If you want to see a video on Waco, put it down below. I'll do a play-by-play, I guess, but it's probably going to be one where I'm going to have to give 2 completely different stories and then merge them together as to what probably happened. That sounds interesting to you. Leave a comment, leave a like, please subscribe. Your help is really appreciated. I'm self-assured of myself. The affirmation of others always helps. And just like David Koresh, don't fall prey to the snake in the garden.
You judge me. You judge us. The things that we've done. People say that I'm crazy.
My family, my brothers, my sisters, they've been taken from me by a in the garden.